Enver Hoxha, the infamous dictator of the 20th century communist Albania, who ruled with an iron fist for over 40 years and transformed his country into the first ever fourth world country, or the ultimate self-sustaining socialist utopia, depending on who you ask. A stubborn, die-hard Marxist-Leninist, arguably more Stalinist than Stalin himself, who put his ideology and personal ideals above all else, and fell out with all his former allies and colleagues in the process, because they were too soft and uncompromising in his opinion. Basically, he was that one guy at a party who would go, "Oh, you like Marx, huh? Name 3 of his theories." But beyond the bunker memes and urban legends, who was Enver Hoxha really? A visionary, a madman, or perhaps something far more sinister and complex? Buckle up, because this is a story of the larger-than-life communist strongman that hasn't gotten his due. Enver Hoxha's early life began in the small southern Albanian town of Gjirokastër, which was, at the time of his birth, still under the lingering influence of the Ottoman Empire. Hoxha's upbringing in a modest middle-class family, thanks to his father's profession as a cloth merchant, afforded him opportunities for education and travel abroad. Hoxha obtained a state scholarship at the Albanian National Lyceum, an elite college in Korça, which was also nicknamed the Lycée, thanks to its curriculum focused on European and French studies. Hoxha was described as a mediocre student prone to a short temper, aggressive behavior, and even clownish antics, often teasing his classmates. It was during this period of his youth and early adulthood that Hoxha's interest in politics, and especially communism and Marxist-Leninism, began to take shape, leading him to become involved in various workers' movements, like the typical 20-something-year-old uni student trying to get laid, that would eventually chart the course of his future. He then went abroad in France, studying natural science, biology, and botany at the University of Montpellier, through another Albanian state-funded scholarship. Hoxha himself admitted that he would have preferred to study history and politics, and had, well, zero interest in natural sciences, like any normal, self-respecting person. As such, he completely neglected his studies, failing to pass a single first-year exam, and eventually had his scholarship cancelled. Moreover, instead of returning to Albania to pay it back, he moved to Paris, inspired by Kanye's hit single, and tried to make ends meet by day whilst also joining French Marxist and socialist circles by night. Eventually, he managed to make some connections within the Communist Party of France, and in his memoirs, he alleged to have written for the French communist newspaper L'Humanité, or however the hell you pronounce it, about his love for socialism and his hatred for the corrupt Albanian ruler at the time, King Zog I. After a short, yet lucrative stint as a secretary at the Albanian consulate in Brussels, Hoxha returned to Albania, working a few years as a teacher in the capital of Tirana, then back in his former lycée in Korça. But things took a sharp turn when World War II broke out and Mussolini's Italy forcibly invaded and occupied Albania. This invasion lit a fire under a lot of Albanians, Hoxha included, who joined the communist resistance movements that popped up during World War II. He may not have been a tactical mastermind or the sharpest tool in the shed, but showing a knack for organization and a ruthless ambition, he quickly climbed the ranks within the burgeoning Communist Party. By 1943, the Communist Party, or the PLA, was the most influential force behind the National Liberation Movement, making Hoxha, in turn, the leader of the revolution. He was very successful in this role, as the liberation movement managed to kick the Italian and German occupiers out of key cities, including the capital of Tirana, aided by the Soviet Union and the UK, as well as Greek and Yugoslav partisans. When the dust settled, Albania organized its first democratic elections, and it came as a surprise to no one that Hoxha's PLA won with 93% of the votes and secured all 82 seats of the parliament. Fairly and legitimately, of course, ushering in his cruel reign as prime minister and de facto god emperor of Albania. But real quick, have you ever typed what you think is your password and boom, incorrect password? You try again, wrong, again, wrong. Now you're resetting it yet again. That used to be me every single week until I started using Proton Pass. And if you want to lock down your data like Hoja locked down the Albanian parliament, my friend, Proton Pass is exactly what you need. And yes, I just made a Cold War reference about a password manager. Stay with me. Proton Pass is a super secure password manager that makes your life way easier. You only have to remember one strong master password. It takes care of the rest: logins, credit cards, notes, you name it. It generates unique passwords, fills them in for you, syncs across all your devices, and even checks the dark web for leaks involving your info. Basically, it's like having a digital bodyguard for your online life. Best part, it's just $249 a month, and your data ties into other secure services by Proton, such as Proton Mail, VPN, and Drive 2. So yeah, no more sticky notes, no more guessing games, no more forgot password loops. Just one place for everything, and it actually feels good knowing it's locked up tighter than a Cold War Albanian bunker. So go to proton.me/ironically for a limited time 50% off. Or click the link in the description and grab yourself Proton Pass. Your future will thank you. Enver Hoxha's regime was, no hyperbole, more Stalinist than Joseph Stalin himself. He quite literally saw the former Soviet leader as his idol and role model, so much so that Hoxha's interpretation of Marxist-Leninist ideals, known as Hoxhaism, was awfully similar to Stalinism, and the two ideologies shared most of their core tenets. I'm talking a highly centralized one-party state, the cult of personality surrounding the leader, strict state control over the economy and all aspects of society, and ruthless suppression of dissent and perceived enemies of the state. Like Stalinism, Hoxhaism emphasized on rapid industrialization, forced collectivization of agriculture, and had a staunchly anti-imperialist stance, viewing the United States and other Western powers as primary adversaries.
Three major devils: United States, Soviet Union, and Israel.
The ideological framework prioritized a rigid adherence to what it considered the correct Marxist-Leninist line, drawing heavily from Stalin's writings and policies. However, Hoxhaism also developed a few unique quirks and deviations from mainstream Stalinism, particularly in its unwavering commitment to self-reliance, Vetovendosia, and its isolationism, whereas Stalinism advocated for proletarian internationalism and cooperation. Whatever that meant. Essentially, Stalin was the Chad going out into the club picking up girls by spewing nonsense about Marx and Lenin, while Hoxha was more or less doing the same, except instead of picking up girls outside, he was in his room debating with strangers on Reddit. Another divergence from Stalinism consisted of its revisionist character, as Hoxha insisted that socialist leaders should own up their past like men, instead of rewriting history and excluding any flaws and mistakes. Being the hardline perfectionist as he was, Enver Hoxha fiercely insisted on his understanding of Marxism-Leninism and placed an emphasis on following his doctrine above all else, even at the cost of severe economic hardship, international isolation, and plummeting living standards. For Hoxha, it was his way or the highway, and I mean that quite literally. Disagreeing with or questioning his methods was perhaps the single worst crime you could commit, and the awaiting punishment was extremely gruesome and downright fatal. The iron fist of Hoxha's rule was most brutally felt throughout extensive and bloody purges carried out by the Sigurumi, his omnipresent secret police. These state-sanctioned campaigns of terror targeted anyone perceived as a threat to his authority or ideological purity, ranging from former comrades and intellectuals to ordinary citizens suspected of dissent. Accusations, often baseless and fueled by paranoia, led to arbitrary arrests, imprisonment in brutal labor camps, torture, and executions. The purges decimated Albanian society, fostering a climate of pervasive fear and suspicion, where families turned against each other, and any deviation from the party line could have fatal consequences. These actions were not merely about eliminating opposition, they were a systematic dismantling of an independent thought or potential challenge to Hoxha's absolute power. Central to maintaining his grip was Hoxha's meticulous control over the social narrative, painting a stark picture of a hostile external world, constantly plotting little old Albania's demise. The West, particularly the United States and capitalist Europe, were consistently portrayed as decadent, imperialistic forces eager to exploit and destroy the socialist utopia and Hoxhaist haven that Albania represented. As it turns out, Hoxha was actually right. In the early 50s, the American CIA and British MI6 orchestrated Operation Valuable, aimed at overthrowing his communist regime in collaboration with NATO troops, Greek separatists, as well as the Yugoslav secret police, or the UDBA. The covert operation was a total failure, as Soviet double agents had infiltrated the Western intelligence and tipped off the Albanian government. The failure of Operation Valuable only galvanized the Albanian dictator into pursuing his alarmist agenda, with him further consolidating his iron grip on the country and pointing towards this failed overthrow to justify any acts of tyranny. Hoxha's control extended to an obsessive degree over every facet of Albanian life, meticulously cultivating a pervasive cult of personality, which at times was comparable to the likes of the Kim dynasty, or closer to home, the Ceausescu regime. He was presented as the infallible leader, the wise father of the nation, and sole interpreter of Marxist-Leninist truth. His image was omnipresent, adoring public buildings, schools, and homes. His speeches and writings were treated as gospel, and any questioning or deviation was unthinkable. This carefully constructed cult of personality served to legitimize his absolute rule, stifle any independent thought, and create an environment where loyalty to Hoxha was synonymous with loyalty to the state and the very survival of Albania as it was defined by his ideology. But obviously, Enver Hoxha couldn't present himself as the dogmatic socialist savior of the masses, while also allowing for religious freedom at the same time. As such, under his staunchly atheistic regime, both Christian and Muslim communities in Albania faced severe persecution. Beginning in 1967, the state intensified its anti-religious campaign, culminating in a declaration of Albania as the world's first atheist state, effectively outlawing all public religious practices. This systematic repression involved the closure and often destruction of churches, mosques, and other religious buildings, as well as the imprisonment, torture, and execution of clergy and devout individuals from both faiths, aiming to eradicate religion entirely from Albanian society. And what's communist totalitarian dictatorship without its corrupt, hypocritical ruling elite, right? To understand the blatant double standard between Hoxha's inner circle and the average Yona, we must take a look at the country's capital, Tirana, and specifically the infamous Bloku, a city within a city, if you will. This lavish residential neighborhood served as the exclusive domain of the Albanian Politburo and their families, a stark contrast to the austerity and deprivation experienced by the vast majority of the population population who were strictly forbidden from entering its guarded perimeter. That being said, beyond simply providing comfortable living for the elite, Hoja also strategically utilized the bloku to subtly gauge the devotion of party members and their allegiance to him. He would force them to attend secret meetings and parties, enticing them with access to the coveted Western goods and entertainment, in order to root out the disloyal traitors within his ranks. Indeed, not even the closest friends and members of his inner circle were safe from political persecution, as they were also, more often than not, victims of his many paranoia-filled purges for various ever-changing reasons and justifications, siding with Albanian nationalists instead of the communists, attempting to overthrow the country, promoting Western capitalist ideas, being pro-Yugoslavia, being anti-Yugoslavia, being inside Hoja's walls, being outside of them, basically whatever excuse was plausible and fueled Hoja's paranoia at that time. Enver Hoxha's paranoia-induced purges were mostly correlated with Albania's foreign policy and its rapidly shrinking list of friends and allies. Even if we ignore his hatred for the Western world, Hoxha, like any terminally online teen, struggled to maintain close ties with his own ideological colleagues, which eventually led to total isolation from the rest of the globe. Take, for instance, Albania's complicated relationship with Yugoslavia, shortly after both countries liberated themselves from the Axis occupiers. At first, the two nations were seen as circumstantial allies, with common goals and conflicting interests. Yes, historic tensions between the two persisted even while they worked together. Of course, I'm talking about Kosovo. What else? However, these tensions were put aside in order to fight and banish their common occupier. During the struggle against Axis occupation in World War II, Enver Hoxha's communist forces in Albania and Josip Broz Tito's partisans in Yugoslavia forged a strong alliance, collaborating militarily to kick the Germans and Italians out and liberate their respective countries. This wartime partnership extended into the post-war period, with Hoxha and Tito supporting each other in consolidating and legitimizing their newly established socialist regimes, fostering a period of close cooperation marked by various economic and political agreements aimed at strengthening their states and regional influence. Hoxha was pleased to see the development of communism in neighboring Yugoslavia under Tito, stating that with it, the PLA wouldn't have been able to hold on to power and resist the pressures from Western capitalists. The prospect of Albania joining under Tito as a seventh Yugoslav republic was also discussed. However, disputes between the Albanian and Yugoslav communist parties still persisted, with the Albanians claiming that the Serbs were simply posing as allies to further their exploitative and colonial interests in their country. While Hoxha's relation with Tito was simply cooperational and business-oriented, he was simply awestruck by Joseph Stalin, following his Stalinist blueprint and seeking his advice regarding Albania's internal implementation of communism, as well as external relations with Yugoslavia. Albanian-Yugoslavian tensions were subdued for a while, but following the Tito-Stalin split in 1948, Enver Hoxha followed suit by taking Stalin's stance and officially cutting all ties with Yugoslavia, leaving Albania geographically isolated and surrounded by enemies on all sides. Hoxha then took things further by enacting a violent purge against all pro-Yugoslav voices on the streets and in the PLA, including Kochi Shosha, former vice prime minister and right-hand man. By terminating its alliance with Yugoslavia, Albania firmly aligned itself with the Soviet Union, solidifying a crucial beneficial alliance. Hoxha's personal admiration for Stalin ensured a strong bond between the two nations, resulting in significant Soviet economic and political support for the fledgling Albanian communist state. This aid was substantial, with estimates suggesting around $200 million in Soviet assistance flowing into Albania. Furthermore, Albania became a member of Comecon, the Soviet-led economic bloc, further integrating its economy with Eastern European socialist states and Warsaw Pact members, and providing a vital, albeit limited, trading network during its increasing isolation from the West. The flourishing of relations between Albania and the USSR took a turn for the worse. However, following Stalin's death and the appointment of Nikita Khrushchev as his successor, the Soviet leaders' proposal for Albania to primarily focus on agricultural output, in the detriment of its industrial development plans, directly clashed with Hoxha's ideas of Albanian self-reliance and self-determination, and was seen as a direct assault on Albanian sovereignty and a betrayal of socialist principles. Adding further fuel to the fire, Khrushchev's denunciation of Stalin, Hoxha's idol and senpai, was perceived as an unforgivable act of revisionism and a personal affront to his brand of Marxist-Leninist ideology, which, as we established, was the true and correct interpretation. Despite this burgeoning ideological conflict and Hoxha's visceral reaction to Khrushchev's policies, severing ties with the USSR immediately was not a viable option, as the Soviet Union remained the primary financial lifeline for the Albanian economy. Still, feeling like he couldn't trust Khrushchev's USSR and his policies, Enver Hoxha decided to look eastwards, thus beginning a lucrative partnership with Maoist China. Chairman Mao Zedong, also increasingly at odds with the Soviets over Khrushchev's revisionism, offered Albania a powerful alternative patron and sugar daddy. Hoxha was drawn to Mao's staunch anti-revisionist stance and his emphasis on revolutionary struggle and self-reliance principles that resonated with his own ideological convictions and his desire for genuine independence. In the eyes of Hoxha, China became a much closer and more desirable ally than the traitorous USSR. Such was the case when, during the Sino-Soviet split, Albania was China's only European ally, and Hoxha officially severed all ties with the USSR and the rest of the Eastern European bloc in the process. Albania was unofficially out of the Warsaw Pact, with its actual withdrawal from the alliance happening in 1968, following the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia. Thus, Albania was pretty much politically excluded from the entire continent of Europe, and their only ally, China, was located 7,000 kilometers away from them. However, in return for this unwavering support, China provided Albania with significant economic and technical assistance, effectively replacing the Soviet Union as its primary benefactor. Their aid and exports were not just financial and material, but cultural as well, inspired by Mao's Cultural Revolution. Hoxha launched his own cultural and ideological revolution in Albania, aiming to completely eradicate religion and modernize the country, but it also served to solidify his control. Hoxha's cult of personality was amplified to extreme levels, and with the state media portraying him as a genius and great leader, and his image and quotes appearing everywhere, essentially deifying him. I'm not referring to just his statues, murals, parades, and tribute anthems. I'm talking carving his first name into a mountain levels of devotion. So, as you can see, Hoxha owes much to China's economic and cultural influence over his regime, and Hoxha-Mao relations were as great as they could be, entering the 1970s. However, disaster struck when US President Richard Nixon visited the Asian Communist Republic, signaling the strengthening of US-China relations. Hoxha felt utterly betrayed by China's openness to trade and cooperate with the West, questioning its dedication to the Marxist-Leninist cause. Slowly but surely, Sino-Albanian relations worsened. Enver Hoxha abandoned its last international ally, and following Mao's death in 1976, all foreign investments and loans in Albania were banned, cutting the country off from the rest of the world. Following Hoxha's self-imposed extreme isolation of his country, Albania became, by all standards, the world's first fourth world country. Hopeless, alone, and incredibly poor. one of the 3 poorest countries in the world, in fact. This hermetization of the country, which was ludicrous even compared to countries like North Korea, was totally by design, as a rapidly maddening Hoja was capable of controlling the global narrative with no internal or external opposition whatsoever. Excluding the evil imperialist capitalist West for obvious reasons, Hoja denounced former socialist allies too. Yugoslavia was labeled an enemy of the Albanian state, while the Soviet Union and others were dismissed as revisionists who had betrayed true Marxism-Leninism and sold their socialist souls for capitalist gains and cheap thrills. In his self-proclaimed role as the last true Marxist-Leninist, Hoxha's regime ramped up its cultish propaganda, casting him as a man of thought, man of action, and the ultimate defender and savior of Albania. These further attempts at strengthening and immortalizing the image of our Albanian dictator also masked an undeniable truth. Hoxha's health was failing, marked by increasing paranoia and severe diagnoses, further accelerated by a heart attack he suffered in the early 70s. This paranoia fueled further purges within the government, leading to imprisonment, forced labor, and execution of perceived enemies. The purges, combined with the regime's isolationist policies, had a devastating effect on governance. Many within the Albanian government lacked advanced education, and the country's closed nature fostered an environment where intermingling and possibly incestuous relationships were rumored to be widespread. This, coupled with Hoxha's own descent into dementia and paranoia, created a perfect storm of dysfunction and repression. There's no other way to put it. Albania, during Enver Hoxha's last years of his reign, resembled a giant countrywide prison camp. High-voltage electric border fences kept the poor Albanians in, even though if you were to ask Hoxha himself, they were designed to keep his foreign enemies out. This was just one of the many delusional expenditures in the defense sector of the country, whose budget was gradually increased over the years. And you know what that means? Bunkers, baby! You get a bunker, and you get a bunker! Everyone gets a bunker! That's right, in his unfathomable and ceaseless wisdom, Enver Hoxha decided to spend about 2% of Albania's GDP on constructing around 750,000 bunkers throughout the country. From huge underground military facilities and hangars to the iconic concrete pillbox bunkers speckled throughout the country. This was justified as a necessary expense in order to prepare Albania for imminent invasions from its many perceived enemies, which by that time was quite literally the entire globe, both Western and Eastern blocs, and the Third World. Spending 2% of your country's economic output on hundreds of thousands of concrete pillboxes because you thought the whole world was out to get you, now that's straight up bunkers. I'm killing myself. In his final years during the early to mid 1980s, Enver Hoxha's grip on Albania and his own health weakened considerably. By January 1985, Hoxha was largely confined to his residence, wheelchair-bound, unable to walk, too exhausted to utter more than a few words at a time, in a perpetual state of drowsiness, and proclaimed Albania's first Hot Wheels prototype. The rare moments he ventured out, such as his few visits to his garden, required assistance and protection from daylight. Hoxha's death in 1985 marked the end of an era, leaving behind a legacy of isolation, paranoia, and a nation struggling to emerge from the shadow of his totalitarian rule. Even in the 7 days of mourning organized by the PLA, people felt uneasy and petrified, not due to deep sadness and regret, but because they feared not to do a wrong move. While his life was over, his regime would still linger on for some time. Following Enver Hoxha's death, his handpicked successor, Ramiz Alia, continued passing his predecessor's policies and maintained the rigid communist system for another 6 years. However, by the late 1980s, the writing was on the wall in regards to the Eastern European Socialist bloc. In 1991, Albania officially abandoned its communist ideology, ushering in a tumultuous transition to democracy and a market economy. The legacy of Hoxha's long and isolationist rule left the nation in a dire state. Post post-communist Albania emerged as one of the poorest countries in the world, with its infrastructure dilapidated, its agrarian economy stagnant, and its population bearing both physical and deep mental scars from decades of repression, fear, and isolation from the outside world. Still, over the past 30 years, Albania has undergone a significant economic rebound, boosting its industrial output, investing in other lucrative sectors, and more recently transforming into an increasingly popular tourist destination renowned for its natural beauty and historical sites. The Bloku district in Tirana, once the exclusive and secretive residential area for the communist elite, now stands as a vibrant hub of cafes, shops, and nightlife, symbolizing the country's opening to the world. While Albania still faces economic challenges and has a ways to go to reach the living standards of more developed European nations, its progress represents a considerable leap from the crippling poverty and stagnation that characterized Enver Hoxha's regime. Enver Hoxha's notoriety on the international stage remains somewhat obscure if we were to compare him to other Eastern European dictators like Romania's Nicolae Ceausescu. While both leaders presided over periods of intense repression and economic hardship while fostering their own cult of personality, Ceausescu's dramatic and violent downfall was heavily televised and widely publicized, contributing to his greater infamy, as opposed to the Albanian leader's demise, courtesy of his deliberate isolation and obscurity from the rest of the world. Still, Enver Hoxha's notoriety in his home country follows the same formula as Ceausescu. Most Albanians hate him, and a few geezers yearn for the good old days. Hoxha's teachings, however, seem to have made their way to the Western world, with distinct leftist Hoxhaist sect simping for him to this day and treating his Albanian dictatorship as the blueprint for an independent, self-sustaining socialist utopia, the likes of which your puny consumerist brain could never understand. Where some people saw and lived through crippling poverty and isolation, they view it as the apex of Marxist society, devoid of profit, bottom lines, and money-hoarding millionaires and moguls. Third poorest country in the world, you say? Oh, please. That's just another pathetic propaganda attempt. They may have been poor by your corrupt capitalist-centric metrics, but they were free and happy. And yeah, that was basically the history of the Albanian communist dictator Enver Hoxha, staunch ideologist, paranoid weirdo, and very overlooked tyrant from the gallery of totally insane leaders of our modern world. As always, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a like and smash that subscribe button. And if you really did, become a member like these wonderful people. My name is Janos, and you've watched Living Ironically in Europe.